Well, let's get started, everybody. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Max Pensicky. I'm co-director here at the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention at the State University of New York at Binghamton in upstate New York. And let me have my co-moderator introduce yourself briefly.
Thanks, Max. Hola, buenos días a todos y todos.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Eugenia Carbone. I'm the Program Director for Latin America of the Auschwitz Institute for the Prevention of Genocide and Mass Atrocities.
So, on behalf of AIPG, the Auschwitz Institute for the Prevention of Genocide and Mass Atrocities, and from us here at the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention, or IGMAP, a very warm welcome to all of you to today's webinar, where we will be exploring with our guests how to improve protection for Colombia's population of displaced persons for Venezuela from all forms of identity-based violence. We are delighted to welcome today two deeply experienced guests to this webinar, and we're looking forward to a productive conversation, I should say. So a few housekeeping things first. First of all, I want to do a land acknowledgement. GMAP, where we are coming to you from, is in Binghamton University in upstate New York. The university lies within the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee Confederation, and in particular in the Onondaga Nation, whose members, since we're talking about forcible displacement today, whose members were forcibly displaced from the vast majority of their land by the United States government in violation of sovereign treaties. Now confined to a tiny remainder of their ancestral lands, the Onondaga have pursued legal remedies in both domestic and international courts for decades. Their case for land restitution and reparations currently rests with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights located in Washington, D.C. Now, just a few technical details of housekeeping stuff before we begin. The webinar is offered in simultaneous English and Spanish interpretation, and just a big shout out to our gifted interpreters who are here with us today, who will make it possible for us to have a bilingual event. You can go down to the bottom of your screen and click on language interpretation. That will take you to the globe-shaped interpretation icon. Click on that, and then use the drop-down menu to select whatever language you would like to hear this webinar in. If you yourself are bilingual and you would like to hear original and English and Spanish from the speakers directly, simply select the interpretation off function. Please don't hesitate to drop an email to igmap@binghamton.edu if you have any difficulties actuating the interpretation function, and we'll be happy to try to give you a hand. Our webinar today is scheduled for 90 minutes. We have a hard stop at 11:30 New York time. We're going to make sure to reserve a good deal of time for you for your questions. When we are ready to take audience questions, we will let you know. And you're invited to submit your questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. When you do submit a question, if you'd be so kind as to also indicate your name and your institutional affiliation, we will try, Eugenia and I will try to get as many of your questions as possible to our guests to answer them. The other important note is that today's webinar is very special for us here at IGMAP and AIPG because it is held to mark the publication, which is happening right this minute, of a new policy paper that was jointly created by our two organizations. The policy paper is entitled Safer Havens, Better Protections of Venezuelans in Colombia from Identity-Based Violence. The policy report is available to you now. You are the first to see it. It's available with links to both the Spanish and the English versions as PDFs in the chat. So please feel free to click that link, copy it, and download the report, read it, and we would be very happy if you would be sharing that report across your own professional and personal networks. So the report that I've just mentioned, like today's webinar, both grow out of a two-day workshop that IGMAP and AIPG organized last fall in Bogota, Colombia. That workshop brought together 24 representatives from Colombian government agencies, the workshop, and a range of both Colombian and Venezuelan-led civil society organizations. And we asked our participants to explore how state and civil society can cooperate more effectively to provide policies and practices that are better able to protect Venezuelan migrants from all forms of identity-based violence once they arrive in Colombia, whether they are planning on staying and integrating into that country or whether they are transiting on the way to other destinations. I'll hand things.
Yes. Well, I will switch into Spanish. Thanks, Max. De nuevo.
Thank you, Max.
Gracias a
Once
todos y
again,
todas.
thanks
Y
to
siguiendo
everyone.
las líneas que nos
And following the
comentaba
lines
Max,
that Max was telling us
lo que
about,
queremos
what
compartirles
we
son
want to share
los
with you
resultados, los
are the
hallazgos
results,
del
the
proyecto,
findings
del
of the
taller y, por
project
supuesto,
of that
realizar
workshop,
nuestra
and of course
conferencia.
the report that we are
Son el
launching
resultado de una
today. That
alianza
is the result of a
entre
partnership
IGMAP, el
between
Instituto Auschwitz para la
IGMAP and
Prevención
the
de Genocidio y
Auschwitz
Atrocidades
Institute for the
Masivas,
Prevention of
propios
Mass
elementos
Atrocities and Genocide, where we
del campo de la
provided
prevención de
elements
atrocidades
from
para poder
the field of
identificar
prevention
los
of
riesgos
atrocities
de la
to
población
identify the
migrante
risks
venezolana
that
en
affect the
toda
migrant
esa
population of Venezuelans, so that we can jointly establish actions to mitigate those risks. This was inspired by a reality that we heard during the workshop, which is the urgent need to have better protections for the Venezuelan migrant population. We know that we're over 7 million people who have fled Venezuela in the past 10 years. And all of this has been caused by the deep social, political, and economic crisis and mass violations to human rights, and caused by the regime of Nicolas Maduro. Also, this continues to impact the neighboring countries such as Colombia. That's why we focused ourselves on Colombia, which has received the largest amount of Venezuelan migrants in their own territory. So against all international trends, Colombia also assumed the commitment and responsibility in a very, very progressive and open way, and they promoted legislation and policies aimed at integrating and including this migrant population. But if we do so, if we look at this from the global perspective, we need to see that all of the efforts are not enough so far, because we still have many shortfalls, because governments and civil society organizations and migrants in Venezuela, in Colombia rather, continue to face challenges, such as the budget deficit in Colombia that is needed to implement policies and programs. We also see that there are issues with a lack of equality for access to policies and programs by migrant persons who are going there looking for safe haven. And of course, all of this is happening within the framework of a historical situation of internal armed conflict, internal displacement, which in turn makes the situation more complex. It makes it more complex, and it makes everyone who's in the situation of human mobility even more dire conditions. So they have a lack of access to basic services, health, food, education, access to food, and drinking water. And we also face the risk of situations of discrimination and violence, identity-based violence. that affects those who have multiple identities that are vulnerable, such as being migrant women, migrants, boys, girls who are migrants, LGBT persons who are migrants. This is a additional risk that is critical to the situation that affects this community. Some of the examples of the risks, and one of the risks that were identified at the workshop and reflected in the report is related to the border crossings that happen without any institutional support or minimal institutional support that is necessary, and with no information as to where risks lie and where the critical points are. Even so, the population in the situation of mobility face those risks, and these risks can be seen in the issue that they are exposed to organized criminal organizations, and that is how situations of extortion, kidnappings, sexual violence, gender-based violence, and forced sex work and other types of violations are part of the risk map that we need to take into consideration. In the cities, this is commonly seen in the axis where there is no true inclusion in the public policies to provide public services that allow these people to properly face these risks, even by the local community. And if we look at Colombia as part of this phenomenon as a destination country or a transit country, settlement country, many of these migrants are traveling north and are exposed to going through the well-known Darien Gap, which in turn multiplies the risks to their security and safety. Something which is additional, which we didn't necessarily saw in the workshop, but it's something that is particularly dire after the elections in Venezuela, which brought about even more problems due to the fact that we needed to improve the protections of these people.
Therefore, finally, with these findings, which have been more exhaustively discussed in this report we invite you to read, we provided some ideas as to how we can face the challenges in order to improve protections for the migrant community from Venezuela and Colombia. These have been thought for the national governments, for local governments, for civil society organizations in Colombia, as well as civil society organizations made of migrant people from Venezuela. These organizations that are at the first, second, and third assistant level for these communities. This report also provides short-term, medium, and long-term recommendations and complexities. You will look at the recommendations that have specific actions, and all of them have an added plus, which is how you can do these actions in a coordinated and cooperating action between the different actors working on caring for the management of migration. I invite you to read the recommendations as a possible roadmap or something that could inspire us to see how each of us can continue to contribute to the process to improve protection of people that are being displaced. You can look at this, the report is better presented, and we just wanted to bring the voices, suggestions, and opinions of colleagues that are here with us, which will guide this dialogue. We have Maritza Mosquera Palacios. Hi, Maritza. She is the Secretary of Social Integration in Bogota. She is joining us from Bogota. Good morning, Maritza. We also have Ana Maria Diez. She is the co-founder and president of the Coalition for Venezuela, which is composed of civil society organizations from Venezuela. She is here with us from Spain. So good afternoon to you, Ana Maria. Now, Max, if I may, let me let you go now. Thank you all for listening to me, and the floor is the next speakers.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome to both of our friends who we got to know in Bogota last year. And so for you in the audience, just to make sure that you know, at IGMAP and APG, our webinars are not maybe like the ones you go to a lot. We don't have formal presentations. We don't do slides. We don't read off screens. We really invite our guests just to talk to us and to talk to each other. So there's no script here, there's no plan, but there's two extremely well-informed and interesting people, and we have a lot of questions for them. So just for both of the guests to start off, and referring to sort of the overview that Eugenia just gave us, our workshop is just about a year old now. And that workshop, I think, gave a lot of the participants an extremely detailed landscape of the risk factors and resilience sources that Venezuelan migrants are dealing with in Colombia. But a year is a long time. And as we all know, risk and resilience are dynamic, not static. And I think a lot has changed in a year. So one of the things I'd like to ask you just to talk about for a few moments each, if you wouldn't mind, and I'll start with you, Ana Maria, if I could. Thinking about the last year, what in your view has changed for the better? What has changed for the worse? What has not changed? What is the current picture that you see of the risk profile for identity-based violence of Venezuelans in Colombia, and what sort of resources may be new, may be different, that we should be paying attention to as those of us on the call go back and read that policy paper that we've just provided. So please, and then we'll hand it over to Maritza to hear her views.
Vale, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much.
Profesor Pensky, y gracias,
Professor
querida Eugenia,
Pensky,
por
thank
esta
you so much,
invitación.
Maria. Thank you so much, Eugenia, for
Empezamos con una
inviting us.
pregunta,
So we start with
potente,
this question that's
porque
actually quite
¿qué ha
powerful.
cambiado desde
What
este
has really
encuentro que
changed
tuvimos
since the last time
en
we
el ambiente de
met
la Universidad
at
Javeriana en
the
Bogotá? Ha cambiado
university
muchísimo.
in
Me
Bogota?
gustaría
Well,
poder
a lot
comunicarles
has
que ha
changed. I
cambiado
would
para
love to
mejor,
tell
pero
you
la
that
verdad es que
it's
no.
changed for the better, but the
En
truth is it
Venezuela
has not.
tenemos ahora más que
Venezuela
nunca
right now,
una
more than
situación
ever,
que se
is
acerca
experiencing a
muy,
situation
muy,
that is very, very
muy al
close
detalle
to
de lo que podríamos llamar
the details of what we would
procesos
name as a
estructurados
structured
con
process
recursos dedicados para la
which has
violación sistemática
dedicated
de los derechos
resources
humanos.
to
Y no lo digo
systematically
yo, lo
violate
dice
human rights.
la
And it's not me
fact-finding
saying this,
mission
but rather a
de las Naciones Unidas,
fact-finding
lo
mission of the
dice
UN.
Human Rights Watch,
It is
lo dice el
also said
Consejo de
by
Seguridad de la ONU,
Human
el
Watch,
Consejo de
the
Derechos Humanos de
Security
la ONU,
Council of the UN, the Human Rights
distintas
Council
misiones
of
de
the UN,
observación
and different international missions of
entre otros
observation,
entes.
among
Entonces,
others.
la
And
situación ha
so
cambiado
the
gravemente
situation,
con
yes,
respecto a
it has
la
changed
violación de los
seriously in
derechos de
terms
los
of the
venezolanos.
violation of
Pero en lo que corresponde
Venezuelan
a
people's rights. But in terms
particularmente
of
identity-based violence.
identity-based
Fíjense que
violence,
recientemente en Venezuela, el
recently,
28 de julio,
on the
tuvimos
28th
un
of
proceso
July,
electoral.
Venezuela went through an
Se eligió
election.
al presidente de la
The
República y
president of
fue
the
un
republic was
contexto
elected,
bastante
and this
polarizado en el
context
cual
was quite
un
polarized. And
bando
there was a
le
side
otorgó más del
which
68% de
gave
los
over
votos a un
68% of
candidato de
votes to
oposición
the opposition
para un
candidate.
cambio
so that we would have a change of government in Venezuela. On the other side, the regime that's in power for 25 years in Venezuela now is still in power. People peacefully asked for the right to elections to be respected and had a manifestation that were violently repressed. From the beginning of the year, we had been reading studies from different universities and institutes in which each one brought out the numbers and had findings, more or less, that if the current Chavist and Maduro regime in Venezuela stays in power, we will have a new wave of forced displacement. And unfortunately, that forecast is true today. In less than 2 months since elections, there are over 2,200 people that have been detained. Over 45 people have disappeared. There are proved cases of approximately 112 torture centers in Venezuela, in the capital, which has been systematically established, which increase mass displacement of people. Brazil, in its border, has already increased by sevenfold the number of Venezuelans that are fleeing Venezuela. We've been monitoring specifically the massive flight of human rights defenders, of journalists and people who had been there as observers of the electoral process, also of people who identify with the opposition political party. These people have been repressed. Other people who are either family members or had any connections with a politician or a reporter or human rights defender have also been prosecuted. So this situation has worsened since last time we talked, and it's very unfortunate. The international community has absolutely rejected this. Colombia has taken the negotiating role in order to try and guarantee the respect of human rights in Venezuela along the government of Brazil, but it has not been very successful. And identity-based violence also has shown that at least there are 20,000 Venezuelan passports that have been canceled because of this, which makes us experience the violation of the right to identity and the total violation of the freedom of association. The civil and political rights are violated, as well as with the recent approval of this law. It prevents and criminalizes the NGOs exercise to, because we're being prosecuted if we work in that sector of society. So Colombia has received many political leaders and journalists and human rights defenders, and we are facing new displacement of approximately 10.4 million people in Latin America.
So thank you very much. That is a massive change over the past year. I want to turn now to our guest, Maritza, and from your perspective in Bogota, what have you seen from the Colombia out perspective?
Bueno, muy buenos días.
Buenos
Good
días.
morning,
Muy
good
buenos
morning.
días,
Good
Ana
morning, good
María. Qué
morning, Ana
gusto
Maria. It is such a
verte,
pleasure
así sea
to
por
see
este
you,
medio,
even if it's
Eugenia
only on
más.
Zoom. It's nice to
Ya va
see
a
you,
ser un
Eugenia,
año que
as
nos
well. It's been almost a
encontramos.
year
De verdad
since we last
que
saw
para
each other.
mí, en mi
So
rol de servidora
as
pública del
a
distrito,
public
que trabajo en la
official
Secretaría de
working
Integración
at the
Social, y
Social
que
Integration
tenemos
Secretariat,
una atención
where
directa
we
a la
care
población
directly
migrante.
to the migrant population.
Puedo decir de que
What I can say
estamos
is that
recibiendo
we
a la
are
población
receiving
pues en
these
unas
people
condiciones
under
que llegan, como lo decía Ana María, huyendo de su
conditions that are
país y
terrible. They're running from their country.
prácticamente pues como con lo poco que pueden
They bring whatever little they
pues
can
recoger para poder
pick up on their
llegar.
way in order to make
Nos
it
hemos unido
out.
con todas las
We've joined
instituciones con las que hemos venido
all
trabajando.
institutions that we've been
Hay un
working
punto
with.
céntrico para
There is
nosotros que es la
a
terminal
main point, which is the
en la
transportation
terminal de
terminal in
Bogotá
Bogota.
se
That is in
concentran un gran
where we
número
have a
de personas
large number
migrantes
of
y es
migrant
un punto de
people, and
confluencia
it is
porque
um,
algunos migrantes que
a
vienen
meeting
del sur
point
del país, que vienen
for
de los países del sur,
migrants
como
who
son
may be coming
Ecuador,
from the
Perú,
southern part of the continent,
Chile,
like Ecuador,
ya
Peru,
quieren
and
retornar a
Chile,
su
do
país
want to go
con
back to
las
their
condiciones que
countries
está describiendo Ana María
under the
y de
conditions that
pronto
Ana
al llegar
Maria
a
has
Bogotá
described. But when
se
they get to
detienen,
Bogota, they
¿sí?
stop
Porque pues el
because
futuro para ellos es
their
incierto. Y
future is
también
quite
los que
uncertain.
vienen de Venezuela,
Those who are coming from
convirtiéndose
Venezuela
Bogotá en ese punto
turn
céntrico
Bogota to
para
the
esta
center
población.
point for
Con los
this
recursos que
population.
tiene el distrito hemos
The
hecho
district
como,
provided resources and they've
hemos
been
puesto sobre la mesa,
seen,
miremos qué
they've
tiene el
been
uno, qué tiene el otro,
set up
qué
something
tiene
to look at what
nuestros
each
aliados
of
para
our
poder
allies can
brindar
provide in
una
order
atención
to
en ese,
provide care.
diríamos, una atención de emergencia de
And I
carácter
would
humanitario a
say
esta
this is
población, siendo ella
humanitarian
priorizada
emergency care
con esas
because this
ayudas
is a priority
humanitarias
population by
inmediatamente.
providing them immediate
Hemos
humanitarian
diseñado
assistance.
rutas de
We've
emergencia porque pues
designed
el tema no da para
emergency
espera,
pathways because we
sino
cannot wait. This is
especialmente cuando
urgent,
se trata de un alojamiento, cuando
especially
se
when it
trata
comes to
de
shelter
esos mínimos, inclusive
and to provide the
un kit de
minimum,
baño, un
like
kit
a
de
bathroom
ducha,
kit or a
para
bathing
podérselo
kit
proporcionar a
that
las
we can
personas
provide
en ese
to these people,
tránsito, pues convirtiendo a Bogotá en esa ciudad, tanto de los
people that are
que
in
vienen del
transit,
sur como de los que vienen de Venezuela. En
people
esas
to
estamos,
provide this
¿sí?
to people from the
En esas
south and
estamos.
coming from the
Sabemos
south
que
and
la
those who are
oleada
coming from Venezuela.
de
This is the
población
situation. We
va a
know this
llegar
wave
especialmente a
will
Bogotá
come to Bogota
y
specifically.
preparándonos, o
So
sea,
we're
venimos
preparing
preparándonos
and we have been
para poder
preparing
brindar
so
esos
that we can
mínimos
provide a
humanitarios y
minimum
que la
humanitarian
población
assistance so
sienta
that
de
people can
que hay
feel
una
that
acogida
there is
para
a,
ellos
a
mínima
place for
y
them,
que
a
su
minimum
tránsito por esta ciudad de Bogotá la sientan como una ciudad
welcome, and that
acogedora,
they
como una
can
ciudad
feel
que
that
los acoge.
Bogota welcomes them.
Gracias,
Thank you
Maritza.
so much,
Gracias, Ana María,
Maritza,
también. Y
and
un
thank you so
poco
much, Ana Maria.
sumado a estas,
And to add
a estos comentarios
to
que
what you
nos
have
hacían
said,
pensar o que nos cuenten
perhaps
qué
you can
conocen
tell us
específicamente, qué
what
información hay
specifically do you know? What is the
disponible que
information
refleje
available
las
that could
barreras
reflect what are
específicas, los
the
desafíos
specific barriers and
puntuales,
challenges
prácticos
that
que hoy día
today
todavía están
are
latentes
still
para estas comunidades, para esta
latent
comunidad.
for these communities even
Por
today?
ejemplos bien concretos y lo más
Specific examples,
localizados
if you can,
posible,
and
porque
very
esto también es
localized
parte
if possible,
de
because that will
conocer
be part of
la realidad
learning
actual.
about the
No
current
sé, Ana María, si
situation.
quieres
Ana Maria, perhaps
empezar.
you would like to begin?
Sí, identifico inmediatamente una serie de retos que, si bien no son nuevos, se agudizan en este contexto.
So
Primero,
these challenges,
nuestra
whether
región
they're not new,
no
they
está
are
preparada
getting
para
worse in
un
this context. Our
desplazamiento
region
masivo
is
de 10
not
millones de personas.
prepared for a
Segundo,
massive
hay un
displacement of
agotamiento
10 million
de
people. Secondly,
donantes con
there's
respecto a la crisis
donor
venezolana.
exhaustion
En este
regarding
punto,
the
deberíamos
Venezuelan
estar ya
crisis.
en una
At
segunda
this
fase
point,
del
we should be
proceso
at
de
a
integración
second
de las primeras
phase of
olas
the integration of
venezolanas
the
que salieron de
first
Venezuela.
waves of
Uno de los
migrants
casos
from
de mayor
Venezuela.
éxito en el
One
mundo
of the most
ciertamente fue Colombia.
successful cases
Bogotá,
in the world
con la
is certainly
iniciativa
Colombia and Bogota,
de Nuevos
thanks
Bogotanos,
to
tomó la
the new
batuta
Bogota
promocionada incluso por el
initiative. They
presidente de los Estados
took
Unidos
the lead, and it was
y el secretario
indeed
general. Muy
commended
buena práctica,
by
integración.
the
Sin
US
embargo,
president as a good
consideremos
practice for
también que esto se
integration.
desarrolla en el contexto de
We also
Latinoamérica,
need to
una de las
consider that this
regiones
is
más
happening
desiguales del
in
mundo.
Latin America, which
Tenemos
is one of the
entonces
most
el reto
unequal regions
agregado
in the
de,
world.
además
We
de
have the
nadie está
legacy
preparado para 10
of the
millones de
fact that we're
personas,
not
hay
prepared
un
for 10 million
agotamiento de
people,
recursos
and
de
there's
ambas
also
cuencas,
donor
hay también de las
exhaustion,
relaciones con
and it's
personas que
also
tenemos. Tercero está
exhaustion
las
by those
oportunidades que tenemos
by people in general,
históricamente en la
and
región. Entonces se
the
solapan todas las
historical
necesidades
disparities in the
y
region.
acá
And so,
están las
given all
primeras.
of
Y
these needs,
obviamente aquí hay
no
también todo
answer
lo
has
que puede
been given to the
generar
previous wave or
tristeza también
needs.
como
And
venezolanos,
there's
tener una
also a
esperanza de quizás
feeling
volver a
of
casa y
sadness
sabemos
and
todos
yearning to
que
go back
esa
home and
reimigración
know
quizás
that perhaps we need to
no es una
remigrate
realidad y yo lo
or
agrego como un cuarto
face
reto
instability. And the fourth
la
challenge
inestabilidad de las
is that
políticas públicas que
instability
algunos
in public
sitios se
policies
tomaron.
that were
No
taken
fueron
in some
políticas
places.
basadas en
Those were not
derechos
policies
humanos,
based on human
sino
rights, but
basadas en
rather
política.
they were based on
Entonces, al cambio de
politics.
gestiones,
So when
se
there's a change
eliminan
of
muchas de esas
administration,
buenas iniciativas
many of the good
que
initiatives
atendieron a
are
venezolanos, que atendieron
removed,
también a ecuatorianos,
those that
cubanos,
were
haitianos y otras
benefiting
poblaciones en nuestra región,
Venezuelans,
y les dieron
Ecuadorians,
un
Haitians,
presupuesto
and
seguro
other
para poder
populations
desarrollarse.
that are being displaced. And
Entonces,
that
eliminamos
made it
esos
even more
procesos de
difficult
nuevas
to start
regionalizaciones
over again
que
in
permiten a las
that
personas ser
country.
protegidas,
So those
que
policies that
evitan
were
caer en
protecting
redes de
people in the
trata y
past
tráfico
to
y
prevent them from
extorsión,
falling in
pues
extortion,
obviamente las
trafficking,
personas
and
son forzadas a reemigrar.
abuse
Y es por
networks,
eso que vemos
these people are
personas
then forced to
yéndose hacia el
remigrate,
Darién,
and you
cruzando,
see that
cruzando
people
las
are
fronteras
fleeing
norte
to
de
the
México,
Darien
pero
Gap,
también
going
tratando de entrar a
to
Europa
northern
por
Mexico,
Medellín.
and
Entonces,
also trying
identifico
to
esos
go
cuatro
to other places like
retos
Europe.
muy puntualmente.
So
Podríamos
the
discutir retos
significant
específicos en el
challenge
país, pero creo que
specifically
en mayor
are
grado
affecting
se
all
resumen
countries,
en lo
but
el status quo en la región.
what we have
Quiero
said
ahora
is that
también, querida
this is a big set of
nuestra
challenges that affect us. I want to send my special greetings to Maritza for all their efforts also.
Gracias, Ana María.
Thank you, Ana Maria.
Eugenia, ¿te parece si
Eugenia, do you think I could jump in? Yes,
sí
of
me ven
course.
en pantalla grande?
Can you see me on the
Ok,
screen?
listo. Yo creo que muy
Okay,
de la mano
perfect.
con lo que dice
I think that
Ana
along the
María,
lines of what Ana Maria just said
ya cuando las
is that
personas
when
llegan,
people come to a
podríamos
certain
decir que
country
estamos en una etapa de
or to Colombia, in
pasar de
this
la
case,
asistencia
we
humanitaria
go
a la
from
estabilización.
humanitarian
Es lo que
aid to
estamos viendo en nuestra
stabilization.
población,
So this
pero
is
pues
what
esta
the
ola nos
population
hace
is
como
facing.
regresarnos,
But
como
this new
a
wave is
reiniciar,
forcing us
porque es
to
una
start
población
over
nueva
again
que está
because
clamando bien por
we are
servicios
seeing a
para
new
su
population
seguimiento.
that is demanding
Lo
services
que
and
decía Ana
attention and
María,
care.
que se haya
As Ana
acuñado
Maria was
Bogotá,
saying,
los nuevos
in
bogotanos, creo que
Bogota,
ese
we have the
término
new
permitió
Bogota
que la población se sintiera
inhabitants,
acogida.
new
En
Bogotanos,
ese
and
marco,
that
en
made these
Bogotá,
Venezuelan migrants
en la
feel more
administración pasada,
integrated. This was an
se
initiative of the previous
encarga de
administration,
formular una política
which
pública
was based on a
para los
public
nuevos
policy
bogotanos.
that
Dos
was
pilares
issued specifically
fundamentales, otra
for
era la
new
garantía,
Bogotanos.
otra era la inclusión,
The,
y otro
so
pilar
the
esa
policies
política
include
era
reception,
apuntarle a
inclusion,
esa
and things
estabilización.
such as
Las barreras,
stabilization.
encontramos
In terms of
algunas,
barriers,
encontramos,
we do see
como
that there
decía
are
Ana María,
several.
no
As Ana
desaparecen,
Maria
algunas
said,
persisten,
that
algunas se
some of those
mantienen y
barriers
a lo
have not
largo
been broken down.
desaparecen
Some of them
rápidamente.
are
Y en ese
kept
marco de
there,
la
some of
formulación de
them
esta
are
política
strengthened, and
y
some of them
promoción
are new.
afirmativa,
So we are
la
taking affirmative
administración en
actions
Bogotá
through our administration in
consideró
Bogota
de que el tener
because
el
we
documento,
realized that
este
having a document such as
permiso
the PPP,
de permanencia
that
temporal para la población,
PPT rather, that
podría
temporary permission to remain
obtener
for
esos
this new
servicios en la
population
administración
would
pública.
give them
Entonces,
the
eso fue lo que
opportunity to have access to
inmediatamente
public
la
services. This
bancarización
would
es una
allow
de las
people to
limitaciones
have access
bastante
to
grandes de la
banking, which is
banca
a huge
colombiana. Si
limitation.
usted no tiene una
In
historia
Colombia,
crediticia,
if you don't
usted no
have
es
a credit
suficiente
history, you are not
potencial
an
para su banca, ¿sí? Pero mucha
potential
población
client
podría
for
acceder a
banking. But
créditos, podría acceder a préstamos
many of these
para
members of
poder
these
emprender y
populations wanted to have access to loans so they could start a small business and take the next step into integration. So the lack of banking access was limiting, for example, also their access to health services and beyond just basic services, and they needed more complicated services, which was yet another limitation. Another challenge is that here in Bogota, to be able to buy a home, if you have the resources or if you want to rent a home, you have to face very difficult challenges. There has to be a cosigner, you have to have official papers, and then that would be a limitation for the migrant population. So, as we saw in the previous workshop, we also say identity-based violence. When people perceive an accent when you speak, Colombia has different regions, and when you speak, people know if you're the north, from the south, from the Pacific, from the coast, from the east. So people would detect an accent, and hearing that accent would lead people to be rejected. And it led to fragmentation. Oh, no, we're not renting to migrants, for example. We're not renting to Venezuelans. That was an additional hurdle for migrants, and many people wanted to live peacefully, but they had to face significant hurdles. Another barrier is that people might be professionals, they have a degree from Venezuela, and they have a degree, and when they get to Colombia, one of the things you must do if you want to have decent compensated work is that you must have a degree. But the validation of your degree requires you to have enough money to go through these administrative processes, which is a very tedious process in Colombia. So you have professionals who finished a college degree and then have to go work to be underemployed compared to their capacity. In many cases, the work that they do is unofficial, part of the informal economy, and with a very low pay. Something that was also a significant effort done by the previous administration was to be able to work on the PPT. If someone had family in the country, perhaps someone would get the PPT, and that would cause division in the family because they would give a PPT to the mother or one of the children and not to the rest of the children. So perhaps a child would go to school, they would graduate from high school, but because they do not have the PPT, they were unable to get a high school degree or the diploma itself. And this would affect them because they would finish school, but they had no way of proving that they actually graduated. So those have been recurring barriers in some cases. So cultural integration is an issue, separation in schools, and so on. And in many sectors, xenophobia was another issue. But many efforts have been made to try to integrate the members of this population. We have the PANAS project, which is a means to bring together cultures, to exchange with the local population. And these are the steps like Bogota have taken to prevent fragmentation and discrimination. And this is what we have done in PRODE. We have to work to minimize barriers. We need to continue working and making efforts. And that's what we have been doing.
Thank you very much
for integration.
Let me introduce, thank you very much, Maritza. That's extremely helpful. Let me introduce yet another factor that complicates everything, and that is the role of Colombia's ongoing domestic armed conflicts. This is particularly important for the large number of Venezuelans who either traverse rural areas on their way to Bogota, or above all, the many, many Venezuelans, increasing all the time, who are not seeing Bogota as a permanent receiving country or host country, but rather understand Bogota as a transit country on their way to other countries and in particular to the United States. So we know that the transit through the Darien Gap has the number of people transiting through the Darien Gap has simply exploded over the last 36 months, and in particular in the last year. It nearly doubled, and that number nearly doubled just between 2022 and 2023. We also know that the majority of people transiting through Darien are Venezuelans. And here I wanted to ask our two guests if they can reflect on how that already treacherous passage is made much more dangerous by the presence of armed groups, in particular in the Golfo Clan, which has become now the largest, best equipped and best organized narco cartel and paramilitary group in the country. We also have, even in the wake of the 2016 final accord between the Santos government and the FARC, we still have ongoing violence from other groups, including the ELN, which just launched an attack on government troops yesterday, or I think the day before yesterday. So how does that fact about Colombia that you are still experiencing, I think over 6 decades of internal armed conflict, how does that affect the way we think about protection of migrants, whether they are staying in Colombia or whether they are transiting Colombia through Darien? And what are the tools in our in Colombia's toolbox or in the civil society to try to reduce the risk that armed conflict and armed paramilitary and narco groups in particular pose to people at their most vulnerable when they are transiting through Darien? Ana Maria, can I start with you and then ask Maritza to also respond?
Sí. Nuevamente, como decía,
Yes, as I was saying, this forced displacement is one of the largest in the world. It is the largest in the continent, and it is facing long-standing challenges. Why is it that do we only focus on response and only focus on that first response, the humanitarian response? As Maritza was saying, integration, citizenship for these people. Well, because those who benefit from vulnerable people who have no documentation, who are in risk of remigration, are those who benefit are these armed groups. A lot has been said about the Tren de Aragua, which is the Venezuela gang that had taken over to the groups to do extortions and kidnappings.
There are criminal bands that are over 30 years old. There are conflicts that have been going on for over 30 years in that region, and especially the Gulf, where they've been living and surviving because of drug trafficking and the trafficking of people. This is nothing new, but they have gotten stronger and richer astronomically. Human displacement in the region also happened, and that is a fact. How do you combat this? How do we contain this? How do we stop it? You can't build up walls and closing borders or closing a jungle. It is not by generating a wall. The way you fight this is fighting the reasons why people that displacement was originating, things that should happen, and we should have sine qua non democracy in Venezuela preventing new displacement. But those people who have already left country should be integrated. The crystal ceiling that is in Venezuela that Marisa expressed so well, since she has so much experience daily of dealing with that, has been something we've been saying for the last 3 years at the Coalición for Venezuela. Integrated people are protected, but also are contributing to the growth of the region that's been shown not just financially by the Inter-American Bank of Development of the World Bank, the IDB, and the Monetary Fund, and others. There are so many public studies as to how migrants and refugees from Venezuela are contributing when they integrate in the new society, but also they enrich our culture and the way in which we face problems that existed previously in the region. It also strengthens resilient systems. To give you an example, which I believe it is practical. So, for instance, Peru. In Lima, the capital, there were 1.5 million Venezuelans that it received. And what happened? Peru has a long history of gender-based violence. It's a cultural underlying theme in Peru. With arrival of these Venezuelans, and particularly Venezuelan women that took this work that was many times in not really good conditions, they were exploited. It was Venezuelans, women who raised their voice to say, you're violating my rights as workers, you are violating my rights, and that's unacceptable. So what happened immediately after is that they started talking to Peruvian women, so to not become victims of work abuse, or women who had been recurrent victims of intra-family violence. They were talking to them, you have to file a claim, you have to, so that we could put a stop to this. So what happened in the end is that the women in Peru have strengthened, have become empowered, and become aware of non-negotiable conducts because of the interaction with Venezuelan women. We may think that they were competing for work or for access to public health, whatever it is, and whatever we always say about Venezuelans or any population that's been displaced. However, you can see that they contributed to access to rights in a specific case. And I can give you many other examples on technology innovations and new businesses, on the strengthening of healthcare systems because of doctors and nurses that arrived from Venezuela. I can have a lot of examples in many cases. But in fact, the solution is to solve the underlying problem, to receive, integrate, and embrace the new diversity in our region, which unfortunately these people will not return to Venezuela anytime soon.
Bueno,
Okay.
si nos hubiéramos puesto de acuerdo con Ana María,
I think
creo
if Ana
que
Maria and I had agreed on
diríamos,
this, I
mejor
think
dicho,
we
en
would
la misma
have
línea,
said maybe the same,
Ana
because
María
along the
lo
same
mira
lines.
desde
Ana Maria
un
is looking at
problema de
this
fondo, que es resolver
by examining
lo
the
que actualmente
underlying
está
problem,
pasando
which should
con la
try
población.
and resolve
Yo
what's
lo
happening
miraría ya
with
cuando
the
llegan
population.
acá.
But the
Y
way
para
I
nosotros es
have this problem is once they arrive,
diseñar
and
mecanismos para
how do we design
desincentivar a la
mechanisms so that
población
we
que
can
siga por ese camino.
incentivize people to
Claro, cuando llegan
continue
acá,
on their way?
población que
Because
no
when they
tiene una
come
fuente de
here,
ingreso,
there are people who have no income,
población
there are people
que los pocos recursos que traían
who
se les acabaron, es una
have
población
exhausted the
vulnerable que
very,
está
very few
al
resources that
garete
they
de
brought with them. They are
cualquier
at the
oferta que
mercy of whatever
aparentemente es
offer they get
remunerada,
because they
pero
are
que
vulnerable.
cuando miran ya están metidas en esas
They
trampas diseñadas
fall into these
en la
traps that
cual
have
se
been
caen
designed for them.
fácilmente. Entonces, parte de lo que tenemos que hacer acá ya con el problema que de pronto
Some of what we should do
la pregunta que
once,
hacía
because you
Max,
have
Bogotá
Max
por
was
su
asking us
ubicación es
in his
central,
question,
¿sí?
Bogota
Y
is central
permite
because of
como vaya hacia el
its
norte,
location.
vaya hacia el sur,
Whether you
vaya
go
hacia el
north, whether you go
occidente,
south, whether you go
y
west or
es
east,
como ya
it
cuando
is the
tenemos
center.
estas
So what happens once we have this
estrategias
population here?
comunicativas para que la
We have to have
población no
communication
siga por ese
strategies so
tránsito,
that
¿sí?
people don't
Es
continue on
peligroso,
their way
peligrosísimo
in this transit because it's very dangerous thing, very, very dangerous. The statistics, the conditions, it's a very difficult terrain. It's a jungle, the kind of jungle that you hear about. And it's very, very difficult. And it's part of my department, by the way. And it's also the temperature, hot, humid. This is something not everybody can deal with if they try to go through. Maybe you can go through rain and heat, but if both together, maybe too hard. How do we disincentivize populations from continuing on their journey? And on the other hand, what Ana Maria said, and I had forgotten to say that there is a huge barrier, and that is that the PPT document has been stopped in our country because if I come to Bogota and I know that they're giving it out, since I'm a carpenter, I will look for work in carpentry. If I can drive, I'll find work as a driver. Because these PPTs are not being issued at the moment, people then look for other ways of making a living, finding other paths which may not be the best for us. But if you get an offer to work, which seems like a good offer initially, then they'll take it. And they end up falling into this undesirable situations. But they are extremely vulnerable, and so that's what they did.
Gracias. Bueno, a
Thank you
ambas,
so much
antes de
to
pasar
both of you.
a
Before we
abrir a preguntas y ahora
give the
también los
floor for
invitamos
questions and answers,
a incluir
let me
preguntas
invite
en
the
la sección
audience
de
to
preguntas y respuestas.
add your
Mientras tanto,
questions
yo tengo,
for
a
that
ver,
session. But
una
let me
curiosidad también sobre el
ask
estado
you,
del
I'm
arte en este
wondering
momento durante
about
el
the state
taller
of
y es parte también
art at
de
the
lo que se
time. We
conoce,
talked
de los
about it in the
problemas incluso
workshop,
que se
and
conocen
it's part of the problems that
en
we've
estos
learned
momentos sobre
about
estos fenómenos y es cómo
during
se
these times and
funciona en
these
términos
phenomena.
de
How does this
articulación
work in terms of
institucional, ya
institutional
sea al
coordination,
interior o
whether
entre gobierno
inside or
nacional y
between
gobiernos
national and
locales,
local
cómo
governments, or
también funcionan
also
las redes de
how
articulación
do
entre
these
organizaciones
networks
de la sociedad
coordinate
civil
between
colombiana, venezolanas y
NGOs
cómo
from
también todo
Venezuela and
esto
Colombia, and how all
o
this
no fluye
flows,
o
or
fluye
does it not flow,
más o
or does
menos
it sort of
entre
flow
institucionalidad pública, gobiernos y
somewhere between governments,
organizaciones de la
public
sociedad civil.
institutions, and civil
El año
society
pasado, durante el taller,
organizations?
vimos que esto
In the
era un
workshop last
desafío, que
year, we saw
había
this was a big
muchos
challenge.
esfuerzos volcados, pero todavía
There were a lot of
no se
efforts,
sustentaban
but
o no estaban
they
dando
weren't
los
supported, or they did
resultados
not
esperados hasta el momento.
provide the
Conocer un poco las
desirable
impresiones
results
de
at the
este
time.
momento
Let
que
me ask
ocupan
you, what are
compartir cada
your
una
thoughts at
de
this time?
ustedes.
What can you tell us?
Ana María.
Ana Maria,
¿Quieren
maybe
empiezo,
you
Ana
can
María?
start. If you'd like this time, I'll start, Ana Maria. Okay.
Hay una institución que es el Instituto Distrital de la Participación, que es el
There is an
IDEPAC.
institute, IDEPAR,
El IDEPAC ha
or
venido jugando
IDEPAP,
un
the
papel muy
Institute for
importante.
Participation, has taken an
Tiene como
important role in
misionalidad
Bogota.
el
Its mission
fortalecimiento
is to
organizativo de organizaciones de la
strengthen
sociedad
or,
civil. Y
civil
creo
society
que en este
organizations.
camino, organizaciones venezolanas que
These
fueron llegando han
Venezuelan organizations
encontrado
that
en
came have
este
found in this
instituto, han
institute
encontrado un respaldo
some
en pro de su
support
fortalecimiento, ¿sí?
to
No todas,
to help them
pero
strengthen.
muchas
Not all of them
organizaciones
have, but there were
venezolanas
many
trabajan
Venezuelan
muy de la mano
organizations that work hand in
con el
hand
IDEPAC para
closely with the IDEPAP
fortalecimiento.
to
Eso
do this work.
ha generado que con pasos
So
no
they might have taken a step to become visible, to promote themselves, or promote what they do.
Creo que ha sido un primer paso que se ha dado.
This was the first
El
step.
reto que nos planteamos en el taller
Our
pasado
challenge,
de que eso hay
and
que
we discussed
seguirlo
this during our
fortaleciendo,
last
hay que
workshop, is to
continuar.
continue
No
to
podíamos
strengthen
decir que está
this.
acabado,
We cannot say we're
terminado,
done, it's
culminado.
finished,
Hay que
or
continuar
all
en ese
cooked, if you will.
fortalecimiento y
We
en
must
esa
continue to strengthen
integración
this and
de
to
verlas como
integrate them,
sociedad
to
civil
see
que
them as civil
pueden
society
en un
organizations
momento
that
dado,
can
me acuerdo mucho
at some point, and I remember we said this at the workshop, what the organizations were putting on the table is that can we just go beyond having been acknowledged as and strengthening, how do we now start to implement actions, policies, service providing, perhaps? How do we become a channel between the states and communities that demand goods and services that we can provide? I would think this is the next step. Make these organizations visible so that they are known and so that they can
dar a conocer el quehacer. Eso sería pues como lo primero.
tell you what they do. That would be the first step. And second, in terms of coordination and articulation,
En su intervención decía
Ana Maria
el
was
desgaste
saying that there is this exhaustion by organizations in terms of cooperation because of for instance, the war in Ukraine.
se da la guerra de Ucrania, vimos que muchos
When
de
it
estos
broke
organismos
out, many of these
cooperantes, sus recursos
cooperating
fueron
entities use the
para
resources to
la guerra de Ucrania. Lo
support
que vemos
the war
es
in
que
Ukraine.
esos recursos han
And so
venido
the
disminuyendo,
resources have
¿sí?
been
Y no se
decreasing.
cuenta con lo que
We
contamos
do not have
pandemia,
what
pospandemia,
we
etcétera.
had
Pero la
during the pandemic or
articulación,
right
yo
after.
diría que para
However,
todos
to
los que somos
articulate this
Estado, inclusive para las
among
mismas
states and even
organizaciones,
for organizations,
el aporte de la cooperación ha sido muy
the
importante.
uh,
Porque pues son los que
contribution
manejan
of
los recursos y
cooperation
son los que
has
nos
been
han
important. They're
permitido
the ones who manage
movernos.
resources and allowed us to
Bogotá
move.
avanzó y tiene un espacio muy
Bogota
importante
has a
que
big
es la
space
Comisión
called
Intersectorial
the
precisamente para
Intersectorial
la población
Commission,
migrante.
which
Eso
is in
dentro de las
fact
acciones
made for
afirmativas
migrant
fue muy bueno para
populations.
Bogotá.
This is part of this affirmative
Dar
action.
ese
It was really
paso
good
que
for Bogota to take this
haya
step
un espacio
to provide an
institucional donde
institutional
todos los
space in
temas de
which
migrante convergen. Ahí está
you
el GIFE que
converge
agrupa toda
all
la cooperación internacional que he
immigrant matters. We have
presentado,
IFE, all
en la cual
international
el
organizations, and
GIFE
it's
lleva su
the
oferta,
GIFE
lleva su
provides
mirada
their view,
de
their
esa
contribution
atención, de
in terms
esa
of
de
care
mirar pues cómo podemos en pro
to
articuladamente
see how
trabajar en
can we
esos fines
coordinate
comunes para la
and work on
atención a
the
la
common
población
goals
y
to
para
take care of
resolver
this population and to
esos
solve
temas. Entonces serían
these
como los
issues.
dos
I
ámbitos.
think these are the two
En el
fronts
marco de la construcción de la política,
in terms of building
tuvimos
policies.
intercambio con
We
lo
did
que
have some
hacen las
exchange
diferentes
with the
ciudades.
different cities
Tuvimos,
and what they do. We
asistieron, por ejemplo, del sur, de
had, for instance,
Pasto, vino la
people
alcaldía
from
de Pasto,
Pasto,
vinieron de
the
Barranquilla,
mayorship from
vinieron
Pasto, from
de
Barranquilla,
Santander,
from Santander,
vinieron de Medellín,
from
y ese
Medellín, came
encuentro
to this
de
meeting
saberes, de
so we
mirar qué está
can
haciendo el uno, qué está
exchange
haciendo el otro,
our
fue muy
know-how to see
importante,
our different
que vale la
experiences
pena
and know
seguirlo
what each one of us is
promocionando para
doing.
que el
It's good
uno
and we should
aprenda del
continue to
otro,
do that so we can learn from each other
cómo esas diferentes
to
miradas nos
see
permiten
how all
fortalecernos
these
y
can help us
articularnos en
strengthen and
pro de
coordinate
esa
to
atención de la población migrante.
provide
En
this care
términos
for
generales, lo
migrant
resumiría de
populations.
esa forma.
I think that's what I would.
Nosotros, ¿qué ha cambiado desde nuestra última reunión?
What has changed
Un
since our
tiempo ha avanzado
last
a nivel de
meeting?
institucionalidad en
The
Colombia para
institutional
respuesta
groups
como
in
tal.
Colombia have
Vimos un
met
retroceso con
for
respecto a
the response.
avance, la
We have
administración se
seen some
generó una de las prioridades
backsliding
más
in
importantes
terms
para la
of
República,
progress
como era la
because
gerencia
we
de fronteras.
saw
Se
the
discutió por la
elimination of
división entre
border
las
management, for
responsabilidades de
example.
quién
There was
atendía
a
población
division
migrante,
of
refugiada, quién
responsibilities
daba
as to who
respuesta
would
a
be taking
posibles
care of
bloqueos en procesos de
asylum-seeking
regularización y la
migrants and who
cantidad
would
que
be
quedaban
in
como
charge
que una
of
especie de
legal
limbo entre
pathways for
haya que
migrants, and this
sacarlos o
would leave
regularizarlos o no, escolarizarlos
parents
o
in
no.
a
Entonces,
sort of limbo
vimos que
and
se generó
children
mucha
in a
incerteza.
sort of limbo
Quiénes
as well, because some were
tienen
giving
cuáles son
legal
sus
pathways and
competencias,
some
algunos
weren't.
tienen
So
incluso
it was not
asignaciones
very
como
clear
para atender
who was in
nuevos
charge of what.
desplazamientos
There were no
y
resources
eventualmente
assigned
cuando la
to
responsabilidad es de todo el mundo termina
entities
siendo
and
de
so on.
nadie.
So in the
¿Qué
end,
ha sucedido?
nobody is responsible for
Que las
nothing. So what has
municipalidades,
happened?
las
municipalities and governors' offices, which are those who are supposed to be in charge of these millions of Venezuelans and other citizens from other countries, are responsible, and they have to provide an answer. No matter how much or how little they have, they provide solutions. So we have seen a disparity in Colombia, where some of the mayor's offices have taken the initiative for integration, and they take over to provide protections for Venezuelans, but they have to face barriers that are beyond their control, such as the national borders and the control of national borders. So the question is, will there be legal pathways for Venezuelans? They've been told no. But what we have heard is that there will be tutors, PPT, to provide legal pathways to children, Venezuelan children in Colombia. There's a huge gap between the end of the PPT and today, where millions of people have entered Colombia and they have no legal pathways, they don't have access to banking, they have no access to employment, and so on. So this is what mayor's offices and governor's offices have not been able to respond to, because it goes beyond their resources. The second tier of what is happening to Venezuelan-led and locally led organizations. I can speak on behalf of my own organization. In Coalición for Venezuela, we have the largest network of migrant-led organizations. We talk about integration and we put it into practice, because we have binational organizations. We are NGOs, Colombian Venezuelan NGOs, Brazilian Venezuelan NGOs, Ecuadorian Venezuelan NGOs, and so on. So if you look at it from the perspective of integration from the inside, we have a constant training processes so that our organizations know how to approach authorities and how to propose public policies that do not conflict with policies of the state, but at the same time are based on rights, so that the diplomats know how to speak to authorities, so that the human rights and prevention of risks and prevention of the risk of natural disaster risk and so on can be addressed by them, so that these organizations can have the best tools so they can do their job in real time. And regarding the diaspora, obviously, this is the work being done by our coalition, working to the outside. We work with other large organizations, trying to learn as soon as we can how to provide more focalized responses. Remember that Venezuela used to be a receiving country. We used to be a safe haven for people who were fleeing their countries. And today, we had to learn how to migrate, how to be refugees. We have made partnerships with organizations from throughout the world and other diasporas. We have learned from the Syrians, from the people of Israel. We have learned from people throughout the world. One of our partnerships in the partnerships with refugees seeking equal access, which is another NGO, large NGO, and we have also worked with RCB platform for the regional answer that we can provide through the UN system. We also work with the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights to respond to human rights violations. We also work with the Organization of American States, which is one of the organizations that participate in the civil society mechanism. We currently participate in the General Assembly of the OAS. And we also work with the Quito process. And this year in particular, we have been working with the government of Chile and all of the linked works groups for the implementation of the Cartagena statute that protects refugees in a region. This is a whole ecosystem that we work within in our coalition, always based on the expertise of all organizations and also on the basis of that invaluable resource, which is the life experience of everyone that supports these organizations.
Thank you very, very much. We are at the top of the hour. Once again, we warmly invite you all in the audience to submit your questions. Please don't be shy. We do want to hear from you, and we want you to have a chance to ask questions of our guests as well. I'd like to start off, and I'm going to enlist the help of Eugenia here to read the first question because I don't think you want to hear my Spanish. I know I don't. So this question is from Irene Cabrera, and she's submitted two questions. I wonder if we could just start with the first because it and get to the second, but because it really addresses something that Ana Maria you were just talking about. So Eugenia, can you maybe read the first question?
Yes, of course. Irene is asking about the situation of persons who are fleeing Venezuela, among those including unaccompanied minors. What is it that do you know? What are the lessons learned that receiving and host countries should take into account when they respond to the needs of this population?
Si quieres respondo yo primero y no sé si...
Perhaps I should answer first, and Maritza can have recommendations from her office. Yes, Ana Maria, please go ahead. The main recommendation that we need to address is that the situation of persons is something that cannot wait for processes that result from policy. People are not going to stop at a border waiting for a piece of paper that gives them legal pathways. Families with a minimum wage will not be able to pay $2,000 for a visa or for fines and so on. So it's so important to say that these are people-centered policies to make our bureaucracies flexible and learn from international agreements so that we can respond to these needs immediately. We cannot think of children as a specific case, though. In the case of Venezuelans, there are 8 million broken families, me included. And this is a story we see every single day. We all have an uncle who lives in Chile or a cousin who lives in Argentina, a brother-in-law who decided to cross the Darien Gap and go to the US, someone who fled to Portugal, and so on. This is not something that we can see as unaccompanied children or unaccompanied minors, which is the most sensitive part of the problem. We have to focus also on the integrity of the family, to focus towards legal pathways and also to provide legal and feasible possibilities for children to grow up in the country by providing them with a document saying, okay, I am legally in this country, I can work here, so I can help provide for my family so we can pay rent and for food. So humanitarian assistance is not another part of the equation. Integration is the first point. When we get someone into our country and we do screening, and this is something that someone came from Venezuela, they were vaccinated, they were screened, they were asked, oh, what do you do? What can you do? Who's with you? What can you work on? And they could be therefore transferred anywhere in Brazil. These are not processes that will happen months later. No, it happens right away. This guarantees that children will not be crossing the Darien Gap by themselves, and we won't see these children rented to cross the border in Chile. So protection includes protecting the family
En
unit.
Colombia y específicamente
In Colombia and
en Bogotá,
specifically in
nuestras
Bogotá,
autoridades
our
en ese sentido, pues, son
authorities
muy fuertes.
have been
Según
very
el Instituto Colombiano de Bienestar
solid.
Familiar,
The
entidad
Colombian
a la cual,
Institute of
los venezolanos le
Family
dan
Well-Being
preferencia a
is
las mujeres.
an entity
Porque, pues, saben
that
que hay
women
acciones muy concretas
that protects women, and usually it's very well respected because we have concrete actions we take in protecting boys, girls who ways such as organized crime, sexual slavery. Sometimes these children are traded, and our authority, when they know that something like this is happening, they take very stern action. So we also have the ESNA working group, which is to prevent sexual exploitation of boys, girls, and adolescents. They carry out operations, and these operations are very feared because they are very, very bold in their actions. We also have a working group for highway workers because wagon carriers, because many families support themselves by selling recyclables, and that is where you see children and adolescents being used for this task. They therefore are usually facing unstable living conditions, and because they work in recycling, they in turn do not get a chance to go to school because instead of going to school, they have to work. So as Ana Maria was saying, I believe that part of the weaknesses and for our population is that the legalization document is not being issued, which means that these migrants see their rights violated constantly, every single day. And if you ask a child, why are you working in recycling? Well, I have no other choice. Or because many times also the adults themselves are the ones that are abusing these children and making them work, and they have no place to go to, and they're prevented from having access to their rights.
Okay, let me thank you both very much. I'm going to actually combine three different questions
Muchísimas
together for
gracias.
you.
Combinaré tres preguntas.
Yeah, I'm going to combine three different questions
Combinaré tres
that have been
preguntas
submitted in
que
order
han sido
to
presentadas para poder,
because they're quite similar. So I'm going
ya
to
que son
read them
similares, las quiero leer
aloud.
en
They
voz
all
alta.
address
Todas
the
las preguntas
role of national and international and regional organizations. So the first question I'd like to read is from Tibi Gallus at AIPG, and I'm just going to read his question aloud. He asks the following: some of the barriers Maritza mentioned seem issues that have to do with the ability of the national government to coordinate its own actions to find solutions to very practical problems. For example, the recognition of degrees from Venezuela could be easily solved by the national government making an effort to find a creative solution that makes recognition of degrees feasible and accessible. Why do you think that the Colombian national government is not delivering results on such practical issues like the recognition of Venezuelan degrees in Colombia? So please take that as the question part one. Part two, if you don't mind, comes from David Kubua, who writes, and I quote, "What role do Colombian authorities such as the National Protection Unit, the UNP, play in protecting Venezuelans?" And part three, having to do not with national, but with regional organizations, comes from Farida Mustafa, who writes, and I quote, "Thank you so much to all panelists for a rich and important discussion. I was wondering if you see a role for regional organizations like the OAS, the Organization of American States, to help coordinate and improve protections for Venezuelan populations in Colombia, whether through directly supporting member countries and civil society organizations or other forms of active support." So I know that's a lot, panelists, but please take those three questions in any direction or in any order you'd like. Thank you.
Listo, gracias, Max.
Thank you, Max.
En cuanto al tema de la convalidación de título, ese es un
With
trámite
respects to the convalidation of your degree, that's something the government deals with. If you're a doctor in your country, but you want to practice medicine in Colombia, before you do so, you must actually go through the convalidation of titles or degree. It takes a lot of paperwork. For someone foreign or for a migrant person who has limited resources, this paperwork is very hard. Because of their demand, it probably would be worthwhile to discuss and suggest to the pertinent authorities to make this paperwork easier and more streamlined. We can see that many people just drop the paperwork halfway through, and their expectation in terms of what they may have wanted to do. For instance, I was a doctor and wanted to practice. The documents take too long and they drop the possibility because they cannot provide for themselves, their needs, and their family. So many then start doing other things that are not their own profession. This is something we need to think about as the government. We need to
dividir o pensar el trámite para una población migrante
how
debiera
to
ser más
streamline the
expedito, más
process so
ágil,
that
evitarle estos
this
traumatismos, ¿sí?
trauma would be
Para que la persona
prevented
pueda
so that people can
seguir en el siguiente
actually
escalón y
go to the
no
next step rather than
caer
be
en el estancamiento.
fall
Sería
between the
pues como
cracks or
parte de mi
be
sugerencia, pero
stagnant.
sí hay
That
que
would be part of the
tratar
suggestion, but we
como
do
de
need
hacerlo
to
visible,
try and make this more visible
hacérselo dar a conocer.
and
Mire, está pasando esto, y si uno mira la
promote this,
decepción
to
de tantas personas
see
que
what's
iniciaron
happening,
el
to
trámite,
see
pero que
that
no
so
lo
many people that
continuaron
started
por
their
el tiempo de
paperwork
espera,
have abandoned
y
it
creo que
because
es
it
una
takes too
acción
long.
que se
That is
podría hacer
something that the
y darla a
government could
conocer
do.
cómo se percibe desde afuera. Eso
And
sería pues como
if we
lo
can tell
primero.
the government how it's
En
seen
cuanto
from
a la
outside.
siguiente pregunta,
That's
si
the
la
first step
Unidad
part.
Nacional de
In terms of
Protección
the
protege
National
a las
Unity of
personas
Protection, does it
venezolanas
protect
migrantes, no,
Venezuelan
la
migrants?
Unidad
No.
Nacional de
The
Protección
National Protection
está
Unit
como creada
has been
para la protección
created
de
to
personajes del
protect
Estado y
people
especialmente personajes de
that are
derechos humanos que
people of the
estén a manos
state
de la
and
sociedad
human rights
civil
people from civil
que
society
presenten un riesgo de
that may
amenaza.
run a risk of threats.
Desconozco cómo sería el trámite
I do not know what
si
kind
una
of
persona
process
de
you'd have
una
to go through
organización
if there's
venezolana que
someone from
presenta
a
este tipo de
Venezuelan
amenaza, cómo sería o cómo lo
organization
presentaría
who
ante la
has been
unidad.
threatened. How
Ahí
could
le soy
they
sincera, lo
process that at that
desconozco.
unit? To be
Pero la
honest,
unidad
I do
como
not
tal
know if
está
there's a
creada
process
para
and
esa
what the
protección de
process will be, but the
personajes
unit has been
públicos
created to protect
del
public
gobierno
figures
y
from the government
miembros de la
and who
sociedad
are
civil
members of civil
que
society
ejercen
who
acciones de defensa de derechos
practice
humanos
actions
que estén
or
en riesgo
defending human
de
rights
amenaza.
that
Pero
run
la
the risk of
población
being
en su
threatened.
común,
However, regular
migrante,
people or
no es un
migrant
problema.
people are not
Y la tercera
under that
pregunta, ¿cómo los
entity.
organismos en el
The third question, how
podrían
do
apoyar en toda esta
other
acción? Yo
entities,
creo
how could
que
they,
entre más
how other bodies
actores
could support
que
us?
tengan la
Well, the more
experiencia y
actors, the
actores de
more
renombre,
experienced, the more
como son
well-known
organismos multilaterales,
entities or
yo creo
multilateral
que bienvenido.
agencies, I think would be welcome.
Diría yo, esa presencia y ese acompañamiento,
Their support and
especialmente los
presence,
gobiernos locales,
particularly local
creo que es
governments, would
fundamental
be essentially my
gobiernos
opinion.
locales en
Local
Colombia hacen
governments
un
in
esfuerzo
Colombia
muy
make
grande
a
para la
great
atención a la
effort
población
to care
migrante
for
porque
migrant
no tienen
population
recursos
because
adicionales y lo
they
tienen que
have
hacer con
no
sus propios
additional
recursos.
resources, so they
Bogotá
must
es
have
un
use
caso
their own
especial.
resources.
Bogotá tiene
Bogota is
fuentes de recursos,
exceptional
tiene
because it
recursos
has
propios. No
resource
puede ser comparado con ninguna otra
sources
ciudad
and cannot be
capital,
compared to
pero las
other capital
regiones,
cities.
los
However, other
gobiernos
regions
locales y las
and local
ciudades,
governments, other
especialmente
cities,
aquellas que están en
and
frontera,
especially those at the
el
border,
esfuerzo, el
really
esfuerzo,
do
la
make a
demanda de
gigantic
atención
effort
para
because
la
there is so much
población, para
demand for
responder a
care
cualquier problemática, el esfuerzo que
is
hacen estos
really,
gobiernos es muy
really
grande y
commendable. It's
cualquier
big, and
acompañamiento,
any support
cualquier
that could be
transmisión de
provided,
conocimiento,
any
cualquier
knowledge exchange,
enseñarles
any
de pronto
support
si los
to
recursos son
perhaps
escasos,
uh,
cómo
show
pueden
them
ellos
how they
buscar
can
a
maximize their
nivel
resources or
internacional.
get
Creo que ese
more
acompañamiento es
international resources.
fundamental
I think that kind of
y
support is
bienvenido y
fundamental
creo que
and
sí
welcome.
deberíamos
I think
darlo.
we should really
Digo yo,
do
en Bogotá
provide it
finalmente estamos en la
because
capital,
Bogota is the
finalmente estamos
capital
muy cerca
and
del
Bogota
gobierno
is but providing
diría yo, y el
support
esfuerzo grande, estar
to
como
the and provide the effort,
darle
this
esa
big
mano a los
effort
gobiernos locales,
to
a los
give a hand
gobiernos
to local
regionales,
and
donde
regional
su
governments
problemática
because
ya
their
no es la atención a su
issues are not just
población
to care for their
históricamente propia
population,
de la
which is
región, sino que se ha
part of the region,
volcado,
but
sino que ha
also
volcado a
provide
la atención de
care
la población migrante.
to migrant populations.
Bien, ojalá yo pudiera
Okay, I
responder
wish I could
por qué
answer
los estados
why
se niegan a sí mismos
states
la
deny
oportunidad de
themselves
crecer
the
con el
opportunity to
talento
grow
migrante y refugiado.
by
Yo no tengo esa
using
respuesta.
the
Esa
talent of
respuesta la
those
tienen
who are
solamente
refugees. I
los
don't have the
gobiernos
answer.
los que toman las
Governments
decisiones.
may have the answer.
Lo que sí puedo decir es que
But what I
hay
can
casos
say is
en
that
mayor o
there
menor grado
are cases in
que han
different
funcionado
degrees
y están
which
probados.
worked
Entonces,
and have been proven.
eso mitiga
And
cualquier
this
narrativa
mitigates
xenofóbica
whatever
y cualquier
xenophobic
narrativa de
narrative
vienen
or
a quitar el empleo. Al
narrative
revés,
saying
venimos
that
es a
they come to
sumar
take away
y hay
employment.
espacio para todos.
It's quite the opposite. We come to
Por ejemplo,
contribute and
Panamá.
there's room for
Panamá
everyone.
tiene
Panama, for example,
145
has
profesiones y oficios
145
protegidos.
different professions and
Algunas
trades
son
that are
tan
protected.
ilógicas como, por
Some
ejemplo,
are so
taxista.
illogical,
Un
like
migrante
taxi
no puede ser
drivers. A
taxista
migrant cannot
en
become
Panamá.
a taxi driver in
Eh,
Panama.
el por qué no lo sé.
Why is
Creo
that?
que son
I don't have the
decisiones muy
answer.
propias de los
Maybe
gobiernos.
these have been decisions taken by
Nosotros
governments
en coalición tenemos
on
tres
their own.
pilares
Our
fundamentales
coalition has three
y uno de ellos
fundamental
es
pillars. One
el tema de la
is
promoción de la integración
promoting
socioeconómica. Y parte de estas conversaciones
socio-economical
pasan
integration.
por nosotros sentarnos en
And
la
part of
mesa a
that is
conversar
for
con
us
estos
to be
actores
at the
de
table to
distintos
talk
niveles de
to
gobierno y
actors
decirles,
at different levels of
tienes
government to tell them
todo este grupo de
you
personas
have
que
this
pueden
entire group
aportar
of people that could
y tienes
contribute.
todo este
You
grupo
have
de
this group of
barreras
people
socioeconómicas
that
que
face
cubrir.
these social and economic
Es una
barriers that
responsabilidad de los
they need to
estados
overcome.
atender
The
a
state
estos
has the
constituyentes
responsibility to
y parte de esto
provide
puede ser la
for their
integración
people, and
de,
part of
de
that could
personas
be to
refugiadas o migrantes,
integrate
no solo
refugees or migrant
venezolanos,
people,
porque nosotros
not just from
abogamos
Venezuela, because
para
we
derechos a
um,
todos.
advocate
Entonces,
for access
eh,
to all.
me gustaría tener
And I would really
la
love
respuesta
to
a esto, pero no
have
la puedo dar
the
yo.
answer, but I cannot give you
Simplemente puedo
that
decirte
answer.
que nosotros
All I can
seguimos
say is
trabajando.
that we continue
Como les
to
decía al
work.
principio, nosotros
As I said
hacemos
at the beginning,
incidencia basada en evidencia y hay
we have
probadísima
advocacy
evidencia
based
de
on
cómo
evidence,
las
and there
personas,
is
cuando se
lots
les
of
da la
evidence that
oportunidad,
show that
pueden
people, when they
venir
have a
a sumar
chance,
muchísimo,
can
muchísimo
really
a los
contribute
países.
to
Con
countries
respecto a las instituciones,
greatly.
mencionaban la Organización de los
In
Estados
terms of
Americanos.
institutions, you talked
Es
about the
necesario saber
OAS.
y entender
It's
cómo funcionan
necessary to
nuestros
know
diversos mecanismos
how our
internacionales. La
different
Organización de los
international
Estados
mechanisms
Americanos
work.
no
The
tiene
Organization
capacidad,
of
por
American
ejemplo, de tomar
States does not
decisiones
have the capacity to take
que en gran
decisions
medida obligue
that
a los estados.
would somehow
¿Apelan a la
force the
voluntad de los
states.
estados?
It's
Sí.
just under
¿Apelan a la
the
diplomacia? Sí.
it's voluntary.
Hay
They could use
presiones y
diplomacy.
resoluciones
Is there
alrededor de
pressure
esto?
and
Sí,
resolutions?
pero no
Yes, there
pueden
are,
decidir
but they
los
cannot
estados. Entonces,
decide
creo
for
que
the
aquí mucho
states
la diplomacia
themselves.
juega
And
un
I
rol
think
y
diplomacy
sin
plays an
embargo
important
hay
role.
una
However,
institución
there
filial
is
de la Organización de
a
Estados
sister
Americanos que está
institution which is the Pan American Development Foundation, sister to the OAS, which provides huge contributions to the region to provide access to rights, social and economic integration, the containment of the hosting of refugees and migrants. And this is in countries in which we have institutions. The Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, also sister to the OAS, does take care of respecting human rights and for states to take responsibility for violation of these rights. So we need to really look at how these institutions are made up and how we can join them, how we can have an impact. We found welcoming ears in the OAS civil society sector and CHA and others, and some specific reporters of the which have helped us defend human rights.
Thank you very much. We are almost at time, but we have so forgive me for the people. I've typed a lot of answers to some of these questions. I do want to squeeze in one last question, and if you two can answer it very briefly, that will give us time to thank you and sign off at our hard stop time. This question is from Paula Mantilla Blanco and Eugenia. Again, to spare all of our audience the experience of my American accent, would you mind reading the question aloud to our two guests? And two guests, if you could just take 30 seconds each to address it, that would be great.
Sí, por supuesto, y creo que
Of course,
mucho
of
de esto
course.
también
And I
ya,
think
ya
many
lo
of
fueron
these
mencionando, con lo
questions
cual
and
creo
things
que
were
puede
already
servir
discussed. So
para
maybe
dar un
this is
cierre
used
y
to conclude,
mostrar las
Yeah.
prioridades
to
o
show
dónde
us
están las
the
prioridades.
priorities and what the
Paula
priorities are.
pregunta, más
Paula
allá de
is
la
asking,
regularización
beyond
y acceso a bienes y
giving them
servicios,
status and
¿cuáles han
providing
sido
access
los
to goods and
principales
services,
retos
what
para la
have been the main
integración social de
challenges for
venezolanos en
social
Colombia?
integration
¿Qué
of
tipo de
Venezuelans in
iniciativas se han
Colombia? What kind of
creado para
initiatives have
combatir
you
la
created to
xenofobia y discriminación?
combat xenophobia and discrimination?
¿Puedo responder rapidito?
May
Súper
I
breve.
be brief? I can respond.
Hemos tratado de hacer mucha
We've tried
conciencia en las
to
autoridades de que cada cosa que
create
dicen
awareness
y
in the
cada
government
decisión que
that
toman
anything they
impacta
say
en la
or
vida de
any
miles,
decision
si no
taken
millones.
can impact thousands
Entonces,
and if
eso
not
es
millions
una
of
labor
people,
de
which
incidencia
is
que tenemos que hacer
advocacy work
todos,
that we all
todos,
have
porque
to
no sobra
do,
nadie. Las
everyone,
organizaciones, los
the
venezolanos, los
organizations,
colombianos,
Venezuelans,
otras nacionalidades.
Colombians, and others
Eso como
nationalities
primera medida de
should do
mitigación.
this, and
Segundo,
that's the first
cuando ya la
mitigation
cosa se va
step.
de las manos,
Second, when things are out of
desmentir los
hand,
bulos.
we have
Sobre
to
todo en el contexto de elecciones,
show
los
what's
candidatos suelen usar
untrue. In
siempre
elections,
la
candidates
figura del
usually
migrante como
use
la
the
persona
migrants
que va
as
a
the person
quitarnos un
who's going to
trabajo,
take away from you
que
your
viene
job or
con
who's
mafias
coming
y este tipo de
to
cosas. Desmentir eso es
commit
crucial.
crimes. We have to fight that
Sobre todo para que
misinformation.
la
That's
población
crucial
tome
so that
decisiones en su
people
voto,
can take their own
sospechadas
decisions
y conscientes
that are
del impacto que esto
pondered
tiene.
and
Y
aware
tercero,
of
pues
the impact
campañas
this will have.
de concientización y de
Third,
trabajo que hacemos,
awareness
que
campaigns
al
as
fin
to the
último
work we do, which
son a
finally
beneficio de todos, no solamente de los
benefit
venezolanos.
all of
Creo que
us
son
and not
tres
just
medidas muy
Venezuelans.
puntuales y
These
muy
are
efectivas.
three specific, efficient steps
Bueno,
we can
aunado
take.
a lo que dice Ana María,
And to join what Ana Maria said,
dar continuidad
I would
a
say
lo que
we
se
need
está
to give
haciendo,
continuity
ser
to what we're
persistente,
doing. We need to be
¿sí? Lo que
persistent.
se ha hecho,
All that's
podríamos
been done
decir, es un inicio,
is just
ha
the
sido
beginning,
bueno, pero
I'd
no se
say.
queda
It's
ahí,
been good, but we
persistir,
cannot stop and
continuar
leave it
y
at that. We need to be persistent, go
me
forward,
uno
and
a lo de las campañas, que a
also,
veces las
I join
campañas
back
de
to
pronto lo
what the
usamos para un
campaigns are
momento
saying.
determinado
Sometimes we have a
y
campaign at a specific
nos
time, but
quedamos ahí.
then
Creo
that's
que
all we
la
do.
campaña
I
continua
believe we need to have continuous
de
campaigning
combatir,
to
de
fight
acoger, creo que
misinformation,
nos
to
serviría
receive
muchísimo,
people. I think
pero
that would be
la
very useful, but
persistencia
to be
de todos los
persistent
frentes, no solamente Estado, las mismas organizaciones, la misma comunidad, nos ayudaría
and
mucho a
by everyone
combatir
would really
este
help us
fenómeno.
fight
Es
this
ser muy
phenomena.
persistente en
We
lo que
need to
venimos
be
haciendo,
persistent
mejorar
with what we're
lo que
doing,
hemos hecho
improve
y
what we've
darle
done,
continuidad.
and continue to do so.
Thank you so much. Let me conclude now by offering a very warm thank you to our two wonderful guests, Maritza and Ana Maria, for I think a really great and informative conversation. Thank you also, by the way, to our two amazing interpreters who whose work allowed so many more people to participate in this event. As always, we are in awe of your skill, and we thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you also to the audience members, all of you who many of you who've stayed for the whole 90 minutes. We're glad to bring this conversation to you. We encourage you once again to download and read the report in both Spanish and English, which I think will help situate today's discussion much more. Please circulate the reports across your networks. And we also warmly invite you to join us for future events, webinars co-hosted with AIPG or just IGMAP webinars. This is today's event and today's policy paper is the first year of a 3-year project where we will be analyzing creative approaches and challenges to protecting displaced populations in 3 countries where who are dealing with this in creative ways. We are all about to hold our second workshop in Kenya. You can look forward to the Kenya report released, in early, we hope, in early 2025. And then and then later Romania for the 3rd and final installment. We hope that you'll come with us on this journey and continue to visit us, and we hope to get to know you. And please reach out to us if we can answer any of your questions. With that, I thank you all for your kind attention and participation. Thank you also for the great questions. And until next time, goodbye from all of us here at AIPG and at IGMAP. Have a great day.
Saludos.